Join me for a conversation with Steve Kenson, designer of Mutants and Masterminds.
Welcome to DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show. Level up your RPG campaigns by filling yourself with stories and knowledge. Explore topics from archaeology to film history to writing to literature and much, much more. This is DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show.
Welcome to the show. My name is Matt, and I am your host. This is the podcast where we learn how to become better game masters and role players by filling ourselves with stories and knowledge. All right, guys, I have an awesome interview coming right up. But first, if you want to support the podcast in some way, please consider liking, rating, reviewing, or subscribing to it wherever you are listening or in your favorite podcast app, player, podcatcher, whatever they're calling it these days. Please do that. Those help the show out immensely, and some of them only take you a few seconds. You just press a button to like it or rate it or review it or to subscribe to it. That would be awesome. Thank you so much. If you want to take a little bit more time, you can type out a review. I would love to see some more reviews on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. Those help the show out, as I mentioned. Also, if you would like to go the extra mile and support the show financially, you can do so at patreon.com/dicegeeks. Also, I would like to direct you to my website, dicegeeks.com, where I create tabletop resource books that help game masters cut down their prep time and have more fun at the table. You may have heard of my Books of Random Tables series. They are helpful for filling in all the little details that suck up GM's time and brain space. I have taken the time to create random tables that allow you just to roll dice or your players to roll dice, so you as a game master can focus on the most important part, which is story. My books can be found at dicegeeks.com, like I said, amazon.com, and drivethrurpg.com. All you have to do is search for Dice Geeks or the Book of Random Tables. Now, here's today's interview. My guest today is game designer Steve Kenson. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Matt. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. How were you first introduced to tabletop role-playing games?
I came across RPGs long, long ago. I was about 11 and stumbled across a copy of the first edition of Gamma World from TSR in a local bookshop. And I begged my parents to buy it for me. And they did. Little did they realize what they were starting. And I, just sort of was fascinated by the whole concept of role-playing games and randomly rolling up characters. So I convinced some friends of mine at school to basically play it with me. And that was pretty much the beginning of my being game master of most of the game groups that I was involved in one form or another.
Yeah, because usually the person who is trying to convince other people to play usually has to be the game master, right?
Generally speaking, yeah, that's been my experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Mine as well. Because if you're the only one who knows what they are, you usually have to run the game at least the first time. Yeah, but that's interesting that you stumbled across Gamma World first. I think you're the first person I've interviewed who stumbled across that one first. And I take it that you just started branching out from there, though, and playing other games as well?
Yeah, I mean, we very quickly found Dungeons and Dragons not long thereafter, especially because there were like 3 published adventures for Gamma World.
Yeah.
First edition. We played them all in relatively quick succession. And by that point, we had discovered D&D, and we had discovered that the settings were unofficially linked because Gamma World was mentioned in the Dungeon Master's Guide for D&D. And so we ended up taking our Gamma World characters to the Hidden Shrine of Tamakan D&D adventure, and our Gamma World characters spent a while rampaging through the world of Greyhawk with their mutant powers and their laser guns and whatnot for a few D&D adventures before we finally were like, maybe we should do an actual like D&D game.
Well, it sounds incredible. I would have
fun.
enjoyed that. Yeah, I would have enjoyed that as well. That sounds awesome. Of course, I've interviewed Mike Bro on the podcast, and he worked on some of those original Gamma World products for TSR. So that was interesting talking to him. So that is, just a kind of a similar story to mine as well, because I discovered D&D when I was 9, and and rampaging certainly fits as well.
Yeah,
because it was rules out the window if we even knew them to begin with, and just cause havoc, and that's basically what we did for a long time.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then, but kind of. Some people stumble across role-playing games and they play for a while and they'll leave. You didn't really leave, right? And no. And this became really your livelihood, right?
Yeah, eventually. I mean, I played RPGs with my friends all through middle school and high school. I started a tabletop gaming group at my local library in high school. I was that guy. And my high school, and I met other friends who were gamers in college. And so what was left of my high school gaming group and another gaming group that I met in college sort of merged around that time and became the foundation of what's honestly still my regular gaming group of friends these days. Most of my current gaming group I met in college. We were, with it, on and off for years. And not long after I graduated from college, I started getting into writing freelance for some RPG products.
Yeah, and I've asked other guests this question too. Is just what do you think it is about role-playing games that so captivates some people?
I think it's the ability to be creative with them. RPGs create such a great framework for creative opportunities. They really just they allow you to come up with all kinds of interesting characters and stories and settings, and so I think that they have a lot of appeal in that regard.
Because I was captivated by them as well, and it's just always interesting to hear just the storytelling aspect, the creativeness that it allows you to do. It's just an amazing outlet. But then you started, as you mentioned, you started freelancing for some RPG companies. But that kind of led you to create a game that is quite well known, which is Mutants and Masterminds. Why don't you tell us kind of the genesis of that, and then we'll kind of dive into it a little bit deeper.
Sure. So by the time Mutants and Masterminds came around, I had been freelancing pretty much as my full-time job for about 7 years, give or take. This was basically in the very early 2000s, right after the third edition of Dungeons and Dragons had released, and the open game license really revolutionized game publishing in a lot of ways. And I had been doing some freelance work for Green Ronin Publishing, which was one of the very first companies to make use of the open game license to do D&D compatible material for third edition. Chris Pramus's Death in Freeport was one of the first two open licensed D&D adventures. And so I had been doing a number of small D&D related projects for Green Ronin. And I had I had a long running interest in superhero role-playing games. I had played them all, game mastered them all, had a long running superhero campaign for a number of years that dominated a lot of our college gaming. And I had designed a setting that later became Freedom City that I had been working on and off for a while. And at the time, there weren't any actual in-print superhero role-playing games. Right around that particular time, almost all of the current superhero RPGs were defunct in one form or another. Even Champions was sort of in legal limbo at that point in terms of its ownership. And so I was lamenting basically to Chris about how I had, designed this whole really cool superhero setting, I thought, but, I couldn't pitch it to anybody because there was nobody interested in publishing a superhero setting at that time. And he said, well, why don't you send it to me and I'll take a look at it. And so I sent him the draft and he read it over and he's like, it is really cool. He's like, I'll tell you what, how about this? If you want to design a D20 superhero game using the open game license, we'll cut you a 2-book deal. We'll do the game book and we'll do your setting book as the setting companion book, and we'll see how it does. And honestly, I was dubious because I was like design a superhero game using D&D, basically. And I'm like, all right, but I really wanted to publish the setting. And so I was like, I'll take a look at it and I'll give it some thought. And I did. And I sat down with the system resource document, which was the open licensed material for third edition D&D, and broke it down and looked at different ways I could, build a superhero type game out of it. And I came up with what I thought was a pretty good approach. I pitched it to Green Ronin. They approved it, and Mutants and Masterminds, came about basically.
As I mentioned, Mutants and Masterminds is quite well known now. Of course, it won some Emmy awards and things like that, and enjoys a pretty robust fan base. It's just interesting to hear that you were kind of dubious that you could take D&D and make it superhero.
Yeah, because I didn't think initially that the sort of class and level based approach of D&D, which is everything is broken down into very modular pieces, really suited the kind of very open approach to the superhero genre, so far as that goes. But it was really a matter of stripping the D20 system down to its core elements and building back up from that. And those core elements work great in that regard. Back in
I guess it would have been in the 90s, I ran a lot of Palladium Heroes Unlimited.
Yep.
Yeah, Heroes Unlimited. Yes. And so me and my gaming group went through a certain, a superhero phase and played that quite a bit. And so I'm just thinking now, about Mutants and Masterminds. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about the setting, Freedom City?
So Freedom City is basically I say it's everything Steve loves about comics, in a superhero setting.
Yeah.
Essentially it's the thing I loved about comics, in addition to just the sheer, fun of superheroes in general, was I definitely became a real lore nerd about comics. I loved the depth that comic book worlds had. And I really fell in love with the notion of the sense of sort of a shared universe, that all these characters lived in the same world, that they interacted, that they had this rich history. And I definitely came of age as a comic book reader around the time of the Marvel handbooks, which were really embracing that notion of the sort of depth and detail of a shared superhero universe. And so I loved those as just reading material. And of course, they drove the notion of learning about new characters and being like, oh, who's this guy? I'm going to go and find these back issues and that sort of a thing. So when I was doing Freedom City, I really liked to build in the sense that it was a really a deep setting that had a lot of history to it, that had a lot going on in it, and that gave the impression that it was a living, breathing world as far as that went. And it was just an opportunity to include basically every trope that I loved about comic books.
Yeah. Yeah. What are some of those tropes?
Oh, it was everything from, what if, mythological deities as superheroes, to, hidden civilizations, to, weird science things, and, schools for teen superheroes, and, pretty much any comic book trope, that has really seen much use shows up in one form or another. And I get to name things after comic creators and put all kinds of, comic book Easter eggs in the setting and things like that, which was fun.
Nice. So I'm sure there's something named Kirby or something like that.
Yes, there's the art museum in Freedom City is the Kirby Museum of Art.
Oh wow, that actually works really well, actually.
yeah. The school where teen superheroes are trained is called the Claremont Academy after Chris Claremont.
Yeah,
things like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And now, before I definitely want to ask you about like your thoughts on running superhero games and what makes awesome superhero games. But before I do that, I mean, obviously, we're living in a day and age right now where almost every movie is a superhero movie, right? Or TV show even, right, is almost a superhero TV show. So what are some of your thoughts on, the Marvel universe and DC, how we're just getting so much of the superhero media nowadays?
Yeah, I mean, I got to say, 12-year-old me would have never believed the sheer volume of superheroes in pop culture now. Because reading comic books was such a niche hobby when I was a tween or teenager. And I mean, like everybody, knew who Superman was and Spider-Man. But, the notion that like the Avengers would be like a pop culture sensation, I would have never believed that. It definitely does create a different understanding of the notion of superheroes, to be sure. And when I was working on the most recent edition of Aberrant for Onyx Path, we talked about that both in terms of conceptually and development. And we talk about it in the book itself, just in terms of being able to point people towards a resource. It's a lot easier now for a game master who wants to do something superhero related to tell people, well, it's like those 20 or 30 movies you've seen.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. The reference section in the back of the book has been expanded quite a bit. And
sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Seeing as how there were like the 1990 Punisher, the 1991 Captain America, and the 79 Spider-Man and Superman would have been about it. And the Batman
been about
movie.
it, yeah.
Yeah, the 89 Batman movie would have been about it. And now, it's I think everybody is getting a sense of what superheroes kind of look like and what they can do. Yeah, that's incredible. So, like I said, I definitely want to ask you, if somebody out there, listening is going to run a superhero campaign, what are some of the key elements that you want to see in an awesome superhero RPG campaign?
Well, I think the first thing to do, as far as a game master setting up a superhero campaign, the very first thing is to get everybody on the same page as far as what you mean by that, because comic book superheroes is such a broad genre, and includes so many different styles to it, that it's really important that everybody has a sense of what kind of a game you're looking to run and play in. Because if somebody wants to play, more of, for lack of a better term, more of an animated series style of game, but somebody wants to play Daredevil from the Netflix series, or for that matter, the Punisher from the Netflix series, that's going to be a real clash in terms of expectations. Is the violence in the game ultra realistic, and our character is going to get bloodied and killed, or is it a real sort of four-color superhero slugfest? Are superheroes, widely respected, and, are likely to be cheered on by bystanders, or are they reviled outlaws? And as the genre continues to grow and we see all kinds of new and different expressions of it, that that sort of agreement is really important from the get-go. You can use a superhero RPG to run a campaign that's like The Boys from Amazon, but that's going to be a really different style game from doing something that's based on the Justice League Unlimited cartoon as a superhero game.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's great advice to kind of get that, get on the same page with the tone of the game master and the group. I think that's critical. Yes, because you're absolutely right. You can go a cartoon way, or you can go the ultra kind of serious, gritty, and you can do that all with superheroes.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And then so maybe if somebody is I'm just kind of thinking too, there are always with superheroes, there's always the trick, if you have a superpowered individual, you need a super villain as well, right? So and just kind of always thinking about the types of, it's sometimes difficult to get somebody who can match the hero, right? Because there are sometimes when you're, you go to the evil base or whatever, and there's just like a whole bunch of human security guards or something. Well, the superhero can run through them, or just knock them all unconscious or do something like that. How do you maybe like seek to balance the the superheroes and the supervillains, and or is it just, do you introduce kryptonite to kind of knock down the hero that has every power or something like that?
Well, you see, the funny thing is, I don't think it's difficult to find challenges for superpowered characters, because the great secret of game mastering, I mean any RPG, but superhero RPGs in particular, is there's always somebody more powerful, and even to the point of there being essentially omnipotent beings in a lot of superhero universes. One of the things that Mutants and Masterminds straight up says in the game is that omnipotent beings may exist, and they don't have game stats because they can do anything. And overcoming such an opponent is not at all about overpowering them. When you're dealing with Mixius Pitlick, or the Beyonder, or some other cosmic being, usually there's a trick to it, and there's some way that the heroes can win, but it isn't going to be by being stronger or more powerful, so far as that goes. Now, that's not a trick you can pull out every adventure by any stretch of the imagination. And a lot of times it is about using the game system to come up with, a set of opponents who are reasonably balanced, against the characters, and can give them a decent fight, so that they can have, a good back and forth so far as that goes. And in my experience, most game systems offer some guidance so far as that goes. Mutants and Masterminds has its power level system that's intended to give you a pretty good ballpark for opponents who are going to be in the same league with characters of that power level, in terms of pitting them against each other. Yeah. And there are a variety of tricks that you can use so far as that goes.
Like what?
Well, one of the key things, and we talk about it a bit more, and honestly, I think Mutants and Masterminds could do a better job of it. We've talked a little bit more in recent times about ways to play around with this. One of the real challenges with superhero games tends to be pitting a group of characters against a single opponent. Usually a solo villain needs to have a lot of power to be able to take on a team of characters. And a lot of that tends to relate to the action economy. When you've got, one villain who's taking one action versus, a group of 5 or 6 characters who each are getting their own turn to fight the villain, that can lead to a real lopsided encounter. And so sometimes you have to finesse some of those things in order to make the encounter a balanced one. I used the example, I just recently wrote an adventure for Mutants and Masterminds where the characters fight a giant alien blob, basically. And in game system terms, the giant blob is built so that it's various pseudopods that the characters are fighting are treated as individual characters, essentially, with their own damage track and the like, so that if the characters are burst out of or blast through one of the pseudopods, it can knock it off or essentially disable it, but it doesn't defeat the villain right out. The villain takes the sort of central body takes more damage and more effort to overcome, so that it's something that can, gang up on a team of heroes and still have a reasonable fighting chance.
Yeah.
So far as that goes.
Yeah. And I think that's actually a very critical point, because as you started mentioning that, I started thinking back to some of the sessions that I had run, and I fell into kind of that same thing. Like the team of like 4 superheroes comes in, and they're finally confronting the villain, on wherever we were, on the top of the Empire State Building or something, and they're confronting them. Yeah. And then, like the villain goes, but he fails, he fails a roll. And then it's like 4 characters just like hit him,
yeah.
and he's down. And then that's it. And you're just like, oh, well, that was
kind of anticlimactic.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, wow, that's like the end of like 18 sessions. It was just like 4 actions and you took him down. Wow. Okay. Yeah. That's great. So that is. Yeah, go ahead.
There's various sorts of rules sleight of hand that you can do, to, sort of address that imbalance. Giving the villain, just like overwhelmingly good defenses, is totally, totally kosher for that kind of encounter. Mm-hmm. That's easily where you pull out an opponent whose defenses are much higher than you would ever allow for a normal, like one-on-one fight, just because that the villain is going to take a pounding, or you want the heroes to have to team up or combine their abilities in some way to overcome the villain's defenses. We do a lot in Mutants and Masterminds with the notion of basically sort of meat shields, in the notion that a villain will have a lot of minions. Yeah. Who will, take hits for them, or that the heroes have to overcome in order to get at the main villain, as an example, as well.
Yeah. Because and then I think I had tried one time to like have a band of supervillains, but the problem is they always betray each other.
Yes. Supervillains are not big on teamwork, unfortunately.
No. It's like, oh, you're getting kind of powerful over there, huh, bud? I'm going to take you down. Yeah, absolutely. No, I think those are some great points. And I think those are good, because that will help, because the last thing you want to do is get to that last session and then just have it be like, oh, actually, session 12 was way harder than session 22, because we just took out the villain and it was no problem. So no, I think those are really good, and I think too, something else you mentioned about superhero campaigns, with like omnipotent beings and all kinds of things like this. The scope of superhero like campaigns or adventures or settings is like all over the place, right? Like you can have your superheroes go to Atlantis, which is a secret society. You can go to Wakanda. You can go to a lost valley of dinosaurs in the Amazon, or you could go to the farthest reaches of space in Orion's belt, and be doing all of these things in kind of a, in a modern 21st century, United States or wherever you're playing, right? It's just like the scope is just like unlimited with superheroes, right?
It can be. I mean, it can basically be as wide as you want it to be, so far as that goes, because comic books have, gladly swiped from every genre of fiction throughout history. So
yeah, when you needed an issue once a month or once a week for for like 50 years, you're like, let's go to space. Let's go to space now.
Sure.
Whatever.
Aliens, other dimensions, sure, all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then you get into what ifs and all that stuff too.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. But now, of course, even beyond superheroes, you've done a lot of other work. And one thing that I found interesting is you wrote a series of tie-in novels for Shadowrun, right?
Mm-hmm. I did.
Yeah. What was that experience kind of like? Had you played a lot of Shadowrun, or?
Oh yeah, I did.
Okay.
My gaming group played Shadowrun pretty much from the get-go. I, as was typical around that time, I bought Shadowrun when it first came out. I read it. I thought it was great, and of course, I ended up running it. But my game group that started a years-long obsession with Shadowrun in my game group. I did eventually get to play as well as friends of mine ran campaigns of their own and the like. And we loved Shadowrun. And Shadowrun is actually how I got my start in the RPG business.
Oh, yeah? How so?
Well, we were, as I said, we basically were playing Shadowrun right from the first edition. And so when second edition Shadowrun was in playtest, I was involved in the on a fan forum in the dark ages of the internet on my dial-up modem, it got us involved to playtest the second edition of the game. And I guess that my voluminous playtest feedback was of interest because I made a number of, honestly, in retrospect, somewhat overreaching suggestions. And Tom Dowd, who was the Shadowrun developer, had someone drop out at the last minute of a short freelance assignment. And so he asked me if I was interested in doing it. It was like 1,000 words or something like that for the Grimoire source book for Magic source book for Shadowrun. And I jumped on it because I was a big fan. I submitted that. Tom liked it. And he asked if I was interested in doing anything more. I said yes. He ended up assigning me a short adventure for the Harlequin's Back anthology not long after that. And that started my process of writing freelance, initially just sort of in my spare time and just for some Shadowrun projects, but it later branched out into other stuff for FASA when they started designing and playtesting Earth Dawn. I was involved in the playtest of that and got some early freelance assignments for that as well. And later, I later branched out to other working for other companies and the like. And in a couple of years, I was doing enough freelance work. I had just gotten my first Shadowrun novel contract that I decided to quit my day job and make a go of it as a full-time freelancer.
Yeah, that's incredible. So what did it feel like to go from fan to writing material for the game?
Kind of terrifying, honestly. I probably obsessed more over that first 1,000-word essay than anything I've ever written, because I just wanted it. I wrote it over the course of a weekend, basically, and I must have rewritten it like a dozen times because I wanted it to be perfect. And that, like anything new, that feeling goes away after a while. But it was still always really very exciting to work with these games and these properties that I enjoyed so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And so then you wrote several novels then for Shadowrun, right?
Yes. Yeah, I wrote 7 Shadowrun novels in total.
Yeah, wow, that is something else. That is something else. I'm still just just thinking about the experience, it must be a really fascinating one then to go from playing it to fan to doing 1,000 words to then writing 7 novels for this property or this setting that you really enjoyed, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was. I enjoyed the experience. I have to say that writing long form fiction is very different from writing game material in a lot of ways.
I don't know. It's just, I just always find it fascinating when somebody who's a fan then later gets to put their stamp on kind of the universe, which is really cool.
Yeah.
And of course, Shadowruns, there's just something about certain games, I think, when the creators just nail like the setting and everything down. And Shadowrun was just like, you hear the premise of wired in cyberpunk with magic and elves and orcs and things, and you're just like, I'm there, done.
Yeah, right.
It's just like, yes, that's it.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. And so that is really really fascinating. I guess then, you were saying it's quite different between game material and long form fiction. Do you have a favorite? Do you prefer game material or do you prefer writing novels?
I actually prefer writing game material. It's why I haven't written a novel in probably about 20 years.
Yeah, that's interesting. I just released my first novel in June of 2021.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you. Definitely not Shadowrun by any means.
Sure.
But it was a very interesting experience to kind of go through that. And I can definitely understand what you mean that between novel and game material is while they're both creative and you're pouring it out, it's creating something that somebody is going to use versus something somebody is going to just experience, with climax and stuff is just, it's just totally different.
Yeah. There was a joke or a meme where somebody basically said, I want to run a campaign, but I want to create all the characters and run them through the adventures myself. I am told that this is called writing a novel.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And as I mentioned frequently on the podcast, since I have been running games since I was 9 years old, I have committed every game master sin. And
sure.
And one of those is jamming 3 wide-eyed, unwilling people through my novel, right? That, should have been just been my novel, but it's just like, you are going to enjoy the story, and you better make the right choices, kind of thing.
Yes.
So I've gotten over that, which is good. But yes, and occasionally you do run across those people. I think it's just because the games, like we said earlier, that the role-playing games just appeal to people who are kind of naturally creative, right? And
absolutely.
And there's nothing wrong with that, right? There's nothing wrong with the initial impulse of the game firing all of this idea, except the game is collaborative. The novel can be written by yourself, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So, I ask you a lot about what you have done in the past. What have you been working on recently? And why don't you just tell us, I'm sure you have a number of projects that you've worked on recently and, some that you're working on right now.
These days, it is, I'm on staff with Green Ronin Publishing. And I basically, technically my title is staff designer, which just means I write stuff. And so it's working on whatever projects, need to be worked on at any given time. So I've worked, on in one form or another, on all of Green Ronin's current game lines, which it includes Mutants and Masterminds and Fantasy Age and Modern Age, and the other age system games like the Expanse and Blue Rose. And I am currently for Green Ronin working on some game system stuff for the fifth season role-playing game, which is based on the Broken Earth novels by N.K. Jemisin, which has been an interesting project. And they're brilliant books. I highly recommend them for anybody who hasn't read them. Mm-hmm. And as well as working on some, I work on some Mutants and Masterminds stuff, and I'm working on some stuff for Fantasy Age as well. So it's a little bit of everything, where Green Ronin is concerned. Mm-hmm. I did a couple of good-sized chunks of a forthcoming book on powers for modern age, which is an interesting, different take on characters with superhuman powers from Mutants and Masterminds. So that was kind of fun to play around with.
How is that different?
Modern age and the powers in the source book is focused on stuff that's much more low level than most comic book superheroes. So it's a lot of psychic powers and spell casting, and a lot of what the system calls extraordinary powers that are more in the lines of things like cybernetic enhancements or sort of low level superpowers that would be associated with being a member of an alien species or things like that. Then the really I can pick up and throw a tank, kind of superhero type stuff.
Yeah.
So and tends to be, although modern age has different what we call modes of gameplay, from the cinematic to the gritty, the powers approach tends towards a little bit more towards the, if not realistic, sort of lower powered level, so far as that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting, because I had kind of always thought about that where, obviously, like you mentioned, like somebody, a superhero who is like super strong and can lift, a tractor trailer or something, mm-hmm. Is obviously, way more powerful than an average human. But, a being or a person who could do something like, lift a 2-ounce object with their mind is still way more powerful than a normal human, right? Like it's just incredibly powerful. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. And you mentioned that you had done some work on the Expanse RPG as well.
Yeah, I did lead design on the core rule book for Expanse, mm-hmm. And I've done some supplementary work since then for now that Ian Lemke has taken over as line developer for Expanse. Okay. I've written some adventures and some source material that is forthcoming.
Okay, interesting. Sadly, the Expanse is on my ever-growing list of things to read and watch, but I just haven't gotten to it yet.
The show is really terrific. Our Green Ronin's license is for the books.
Okay, gotcha.
And not the show, which we have to be very clear about because they're two separate properties, technically.
Yeah. Okay.
But the show is terrific. I recommend it. The books are great too. Mm-hmm. And needless to say, I think that the RPG is pretty cool.
Well, yeah, and we won't say that you're biased or anything.
No, not at all.
No. I'm just wondering really quick. I know I've had you on here a while now, but I'm just wondering kind of really quick, when you have a property like The Expanse and it's, it goes obviously huge in books and then it becomes a huge show on Amazon. And you're going to tackle it and put it into a role-playing game. I'm always curious, like, how do you try to keep the same feel of the book in the RPG, if you know what I mean, right? Like there's a certain tone or feel to the book, a certain book or a certain universe. How do you try to go about, transferring that to the RPG?
I try to look at certain, I familiarize myself obviously with the source material, and I try and look at certain key elements or common themes in the source material and see how we can include that. So one example in the Expanse, and I think I can do this without many spoilers. It is a common narrative element in the Expanse books that there is a moment in almost every book where things go horribly awry. Like you think things are bad, and then it's like, oh, wow, things just got way worse. Like immeasurably worse.
Yeah.
And I wanted to have that element in the narrative of the game. So we built a mechanic called the Churn, which is what one character in the Expanse refers to as this, just sort of, things hitting the fan situation. And basically it's a tension mechanic that the better the characters do, basically the better things are going. The more they succeed, the more they use their resources to succeed, because they have certain player controlled resources that can enhance their chances and things like that. The more that this tally essentially that the game master has builds up, and when the churn hits certain thresholds, the game master rolls some dice and says, okay, so this is what happens. And sometimes it can be nothing. Sometimes it can be things really go sideways. And even when it's nothing, it means that the churn just keeps growing. And the higher the threshold gets, the worse the eventual backlash will be. So sometimes you want the churn to get it over with, like you'd rather have it trigger and, it be not something it's bad, but not catastrophic.
Yeah.
Because the longer it builds up, the worse it's going to eventually be.
Gotcha.
And so that's one of those things that's always just sort of out there in the back of the player's awareness. And I think creates that same sort of expectation that somebody who's reading the Expanse books will have when they know something's going to happen, it's coming.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. That sounds like an awesome mechanic, and it keeps right along with kind of the flavor of the world that has been created, that something's just going to go terrible. So that's really, and I'm sure it'd keep the players on edge as well. Once they learn about that mechanic, they know that something's going to go terribly wrong at some point. Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. That sounds really great. Well, like I said, I had him on here a long time. Where can people, find out more about you and find some of your games and some of your other awesome stuff?
So I have a website at stevekenson.com. That is pretty much my very occasionally updated blog. And, one-stop shopping as far as my, bibliography and my current projects and those sorts of things for people who want to see what I'm up to these days. And I am on Twitter at @skenson, Kenson. It's probably the social media I use the most. I am on Facebook, but honestly, I don't interact much on Facebook for the most part. And I'm honestly terrible about Facebook friend requests, especially for people I don't know. Yeah. So folks are much better if they want to find me on social media. Twitter's better. I'm on Instagram, but nobody cares about that because it's just me posting pictures of food for the most part. And I have a Patreon at patreon.com/Steve Kenson, where I am mostly doing stuff for Icon's Superpowered Role-Playing, which is a fun sort of pickup superhero game I designed about, now like 12 years ago or so, that I self-published things for through that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's great. And I will be sure to put links to your social media, to your website, and to your Patreon. And I'll also throw some links to Mutants and Masterminds and maybe the Expanse in the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com. So anybody who's listening right now, if you head over to dicegeeks.com, the show notes for this episode will have those links where you can check out Steve's incredible games and his website. Well, Steve, it was just an absolute pleasure to speak with you today. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, pleasure was mine. Thank you for having me.
All right, there you have it, guys. I really hope you enjoyed my interview with Steve today. It was fantastic just to get to speak with a game designer of his caliber, and I hope we all learned a lot. Now, as I mentioned in the show, I have provided links to Mutants and Masterminds and to some of Steve's other role-playing game resources and books. Those can be found in the show notes at dicegeeks.com. So head over there right now, check out Mutants and Masterminds and some of Steve's other role-playing game books. You will not regret it. Okay, guys, if you want some free stuff, head over to dicegeeks.com/free. You will get 20 free dungeon maps. Yes, I said 20 free dungeon maps. You will also get a custom 5e background that I created for free. You will also never miss an episode of this show. And each and every Friday, you'll get an email update from me letting you know what is going on in the wild world of Dice Geeks. Yes, I've upgraded. So head over to dicegeeks.com/free so you don't miss out. All right, guys. I thank you so much for listening. It is always a pleasure to come to you each and every Wednesday. Make sure you come back next Wednesday for another awesome interview. Until then, keep gaming.